Anytime you can start off a season 3-1, you can bet a lot of things are going right for you. But there's always room for improvement. So today we're going to get into some of those things that are going right, some of those things that are going very right, and those areas of growth we can still address moving forward. All that's coming up after the bumper. So I'm just going to get this area of opportunity out of the way right off the bat for the Mavericks. The reason? Because if I get this out of the way now, the rest of the video is going to feel very positive as opposed to like building towards some huge red flag that honestly at this juncture I don't feel is a significant red flag yet, but a 4-game sample size, it's worth noting, so we will. What am I talking about? Free throws. Specifically, the number of attempts per game. The Mavericks, if you watched my last post-game show against the Timberwolves, you'll notice the Mavericks shot about 18 or 19 free throws. Well, that tracks because they are in fact averaging 19 free throw attempts per game. That is 29th in the NBA. So yeah, that's not good enough. You got to get to the rim more. You got to force the contact, put that pressure on the opposing defense. Part of that is that the Mavericks, along with really the majority of the NBA, it seems like at this point, have gone so all in on 3-point attempts that you're just not getting as many 2-point attempts right around the basket. But generally, this modern NBA is shoot a whole lot of threes. I think the Celtics are shooting 40 plus at this point. The Mavericks were right there on that similar platform with them last year, and now the Celtics seemingly have taken it to a completely new level even yet. But if it wasn't a 3 in the modern game, it's right at the rim. The mid-range game is kind of one of those dying arts that not a guys really work with a lot. Fortunately, you do have a couple guys in Luka and Kyrie who will still weaponize that to great effect. But more 3-point attempts means fewer attempts at the rim and thus fewer opportunities to get to the charity stripe here. So with the Mavericks averaging 19 free throws a game, again, 29th in the league, you're not able to apply that same measure of pressure on the defense. And when you compound that with the fact that their opponents are averaging about 29 free throws per game, you see how, okay, just in the opportunities department, we're essentially giving them a 10 free throw attempt margin. That's going to limit us a little bit. That's going to make us have to work harder. Now, if we have one of those games where our threes aren't falling collectively as a team, it's going to be more problematic. You have to also make the attempts, which I know in the past has been a problem for this team. PJ Washington, not a great free throw shooter. Daniel Gafford, not a great free throw shooter. Derek Lively, not a great free throw shooter. Luka, although he's been better the last 2 seasons, is still a good, not great free throw shooter. In the past, he's been a bad free throw shooter. Even opportunities like late in that Wolves game, Kyrie Irving, a guy that has the year before just shot 89% from the free throw line, missed 2 huge free throws in that game. And the only reason we're not talking about it is because Najee Marshall strips Anthony Edwards about 5 seconds later, and it's a moot point. But even still, this is something to keep an eye on. It's early, but I want to see Dallas doing a better job getting to the line and then actually converting. Defensively, I think Dallas has largely been really solid this year. Not at the same level defensively they were in the playoffs last year, certainly, but I do like a lot of what I've seen from them defensively, and I think a lot of this will adjust itself as they themselves do a better job getting to the line. So that's the downtrend for us right now, just the thing of note to begin with. Next, I want to talk about I don't even know if I would say this first part of it is a pro or a con. It's just a thing of note. Luka and Klay Thompson are virtually tied at the hip in terms of their minutes. Now, we saw in the preseason the Thompson-Kyrie duo not really finding a lot of success. They're going to have to work that out over the course of the season, but it's very clear early on that part of getting Klay Thompson going, as they've been able to do, I know he only had 7 points against the T-Wolves this last game, but part of getting him going as well as he has through these first 4 games with his new team has been getting him just an obscene number of great looks. The gravity of Luka, the gravity of Klay is really stressing defenses right now. So you have a situation where they've played like something like 5 minutes apart, like not having both of them together on the floor. There's only 5 such minutes through 4 games. And you compare that to the other combination there, Klay and Kyrie, and it's drastically different. So really interesting to see how they're doing that. I get part of why. They've seen, the sample size of the preseason, and they're trying to make sure that Klay is getting going early with his new stint in Dallas. But it's interesting to see them this joined at the hip in terms of whether or not they're on the floor. It's clearly working, but you are going to have to find a greater balance with that as the season goes. If for no other reason, then there's going to be games Luka misses. There's going to be games that Klay misses. And at times, you're just going to have Kyrie and Klay having to start together or having to play a lot of minutes together because of injuries. That's just the circumstance. So we'll see how that goes. But speaking of Klay, let's talk about his early fit in Dallas. Now, going into this last game, obviously his average skewed downward quite a bit, having just 7 points on 2 of 7 shooting. But Klay Thompson, through his first 3 games, was averaging 20 points for the Mavericks, shooting something like 48% from 3 at the time. Now, after that game, he's still in a situation where 30 of his 33 three-point attempts on the year, 29 of them have been open or wide open. That's 88% of his looks. And he's shooting 46% on like 11 attempts per game. That's mind-boggling that he's been able to do that he's had that kind of open space to work with. And that's why Dallas has leaned so hard on him and Luka. It's just the way that they're stressing defenses, that you can have statistically the second most accurate three-point shooter of all time getting those types of looks is just crazy. And so how he's been able to really impact the game on that side while not having to have the burden and the challenge put on him that normally you would have being the second best guy, the co-star or part of the big three. I know he's still part of this Dallas big three, but it's not the same measure of responsibility he had with him in Golden State when it was him and Steph, and then you had Draymond in there, and you had Durant for a while. So him now being in this new position probably takes a little bit of that burden and pressure off of him, while at the same time affording him the opportunity to just kind of pick and choose his spots. He can step up and be that leader, that verbal leader, and setting the example for the guys when he needs to, but he can also take that step back and operate in more of an isolated sense where he doesn't have to worry about it. He's like, hey, my opportunities are going to come. I know they're going to be there, and I'm going to take advantage of it. I don't have to worry about this where it's like, dude, I have to have 20 points this game or else we're in trouble. That's why you had a game like the Timberwolves game where he's 2 of 7, both from 3, and I think all 7 of his attempts were threes, in fact, in that game. Makes both of those hits in the first half, and then it's just kind of crickets from there on. But the gravity of him allows you, with like 4 minutes left, you get that out-of-bounds timeout draw up for a backdoor lob to he sets the back screen on P.J. Washington's man, and Klay's guy's like, I can't switch here. I can't leave. I can't leave Klay Thompson in this situation. So he sticks. P.J. gets a wide-open, easy lob for Dallas there. That's the kind of gravity that Klay brings, even in those nights where he's not scoring a lot or hitting a lot of threes. So that's unique and worth mentioning as well. And again, 11 attempts per game, shooting 46%. 29 out of 33 attempts being open or wide open. Like, that's 88% of your looks with 4 to 6 plus feet of space around you. Good Lord, that's going to bode very, very well for you. So having that makes sense then that his minutes have been tied to Luka as they have been. It's also helped him make more effort and put in more on the defensive side. He's not what he once was. Nobody's trying to say that. I don't know. Maybe Klay would try and tell you otherwise, just the chip he puts on his shoulder. But he's not what he was before his injury, certainly. But at the very least, he's still showing he can be capable. Anthony Edwards exploded in the first quarter of that game the other night. But after that, he really went quiet. He had 24 points, was hitting a whole bunch of threes. And then in the second quarter, he had like 2 or 3 points. he ended the game with 37. So it's like you had 13 points after your explosive first quarter, and Klay worked on him a lot in that game. And he's about as quick and athletic and explosive of a player as you're going to get. So, yeah, that's worth noting. That is absolutely worth noting that Klay Thompson, between the looks he's getting, the space and rhythm he's been able to find, not having, being unburdened in this sense in terms of his responsibility and what he has to produce on a given night, has, I think, energized him to make bigger impacts in other areas of his game, areas that were huge question marks entering the season for him in Dallas in terms of that fit. So that's an up. Very big up there. Speaking of improvements, I would be remiss. I mentioned again in that Timberwolves game being very impressed with Daniel Gafford and how he performed, how in 21 minutes he had 14 points, how he had several big plays, really played well against Rudy Gobert. Now, Gobert is not an offensive weapon by any means, but I liked how, in some of the specifics of this one, shout out to Locked On Mavs for that. Their discussion in their most recent podcast episode kind of put it in greater context for me. Daniel Gafford's greatest improvement that we've seen compared to even just the playoff run last year is his ability to guard with respect to switches, having to move around, navigate the perimeter more competently. That's part of why he was abused as much as he was in that Timberwolves series last year. He was not good. The effort was there, the heart was there, and you saw him making nice big plays at times, whether it was blocking shots or getting putbacks, alley-oops. You get the one shot where he's getting fouled on a deep pass in transition and then falling down backwards, flips it up into the basket while drawing the contact. So you got incredible plays like that, and that is awesome. But you also had him being like a negative 36 in terms of plus minus on the series, and that's not so awesome. So that was something that was an area of concern. Obviously, against the Celtics in the finals, further exposed. And I know we're talking about a guy that's in his mid-20s, just starting to get to moving towards the back end of the 20s. I think he's 26, I want to say off the top of my head. So you got a guy like that who's been in this situation, trying to break through, trying to find his rhythm, and has taken it upon himself to say, like, okay, this was my first taste, not even season, because he came in at the deadline. This was his first taste of meaningful basketball. It wasn't his first playoff experience. He did have that year when Westbrook was with the Wizards and they got to the playoffs. But that was a cup of coffee, man. That was nothing. So this was his first real taste of playoff basketball. And he saw, like, okay, here's where I don't measure up. Seeing now what this looks like, what this feels like, here's where I don't measure up. And demonstrably through 4 games, again, small sample size, but call it what it is. We're through the first week of basketball here. He's looking at it and he's like, or we're looking at it and it's like, dude, he's made like substantial strides on this. He's doing a much better job. There was a sequence, again, Locked On Mavs ran through this where he's having to guard a switch, get back to Gobert, deal with more gumption in the paint, and then still gets there to block Gobert at the rim on a dunk attempt. Like, yeah, that's legitimate. That's the kind of thing that he struggled with last year in that playoff run. So I love that improvement from him, and it's one of the reasons why, as we get ready, and I'm not jumping to it yet, but it's one of the reasons why this next thing that's been kind of a talking point in Mavs Twitter and the fan base, why it makes sense and why it's kind of happening the way it is. But also, shout out again, he's shooting 59% from the field this year, which you would normally say is, oh, by the way, Gafford defensive improvement, big thumbs up. He's shooting 59% from the field this year, which normally you would say, like, oh yeah, that's good, except he's the lob guy. He's the guy that like had the stretches last year of like, what was it, 29 straight made field goals, another time of 34 straight made field goals. It's because everything was like point blank at the rim, layups, or alley-oop dunks. Well, through 4 games this year, teams have really worked to take away the lob threat for Dallas. Now, that makes sense because Dallas was a team that feasted on those last year. Obviously, you don't have Derrick Jones Jr. You do take, from an athletic standpoint, a step back now with Najee Marshall. But you still have P.J. Washington, you still have Lively, you still have Gafford. You still have athletes who can get up there and throw it down. It's just a little bit of a different variety now. And teams selling out so hard to block those opportunities are leaving those three-point looks and leaving those mid-range opportunities open, which Luka hit some really tough mid-range shots in that second half against the Timberwolves. And that's one of those things that's like, it's a continued area of growth in his game and just taking the opportunity that's there. So I love that. I love that adjustment. But it is something that's worth pointing out that, hey, this thing that was a huge part of Dallas's identity and success has been taken away from that. And as, again, Locked On pointed out, Dallas only has 5 lob attempts on the year through 4 games. That would be a single quarter in some games last year. Like, we had a first quarter late in the year where Dallas had 10 dunks before the end of the first quarter. Like, again, not every dunk is a lob, but still, that's really saying something. So to have them taken away as they have been, but to still be in the situation where the offense is still generally doing quite well, even though Luka hasn't shot the ball well in all but the Phoenix game, I think is really impactful to that. So for Gafford, put in these situations where, hey, the thing that you do, the thing that is like your bread and butter, for that to be taken away and you still being as effective as you have been, really says a lot. Again, I give very high-end praise right now to Daniel Gafford and the improvements he made in the offseason. Because even if he just came back with the defensive improvement that he made, like we talked about, operating the switches, having to guard in space a little bit more, kind of finding that balance between giving that help, even if it's hedging, and then getting back to his man and being in position to make a good defensive play. Even if we were just talking about that, I would say, like, kudos, good job. But the fact that he's also been able to upgrade a little bit in the offensive game as well, the low post game, and not just relying solely on those lobs, I think is really, really important for this team as we move forward. And it's just another reason why, oh yeah, I'm giving it up on the offense, but it's just another reason why it makes sense that he's the starter right now for Dallas. I know some fans, because Derek Lively is so phenomenal, I think pound for pound, Derek Lively is the better of the two. However, some things to note here. The team last year with Gafford in the lineup in the regular season won like 19 out of 21 games. Gafford is bigger, he's stronger, and he doesn't have the history of nagging injuries the way that we've now seen. Again, a 1-year sample size, barely started year 2, but that we've seen for Lively. So it makes sense. Also worth pointing out, Lively has played more minutes than Gafford in every single game this year, and he's been in the closing lineup. Worth noting. So you look at these things, and it's like, first of all, it really doesn't matter. Second of all, to the extent that it does matter, there's plenty of evidence for why it's Gafford and not Lively in those situations. And the fact that we're having this conversation, it's just fan chatter. That's really all it is. Because even Derek Lively, asked about the center duo playing alongside Daniel Gafford, said, quote, "I'm here to win games. I'm not here to care about how many points I put on the board, how many rebounds I put on the board, how many times I start, and he's the same." Oh, let me break that up a little bit. How many times I start, and he's the same. We have a great 1-2 dynamic of picking each other up. I look at him as an older brother. That's all you need to know about it. Neither of these guys has an ego. Neither of them is going to worry about who's getting more opportunities or anything like that. It's just at the end of the day, they're going to do what they do. Their minutes are going to be fairly balanced between them. And if you want anything to make you feel better, like if you think Lively should be that guy, and by the way, I'm not even saying you're inherently wrong. I'm just saying there's plenty of evidence for supporting why Gafford is in the position that he's in and being utilized as he is. You're still getting Lively in those closing lineups. TGK, give credit to him on this. He pulled some data here showing part of the reason for Gafford starting. Again, small sample size. I have to say that for every one of these things, but it is just 4 games. When your starting lineup is Kyrie, Klay Thompson, PJ Washington, Luka Doncic, and Daniel Gafford, you have a net rating of plus 8.8. You have an offensive rating of 117.7 and a defensive rating of 108.8. Now let's change that equation a little bit and swap out Gafford for Lively. Granted, it's 51 minutes compared to 20, but your offensive rating is 112.5 and defensive rating 148.6. That's a negative 36.1 rating. Here's the thing. 20 minutes, if we're saying 4 games is a small sample size, 20 minutes is microscopic. However, it's not a trend I expect to carry out and continue either. But for right now, what we're seeing is, swap out just the center position, and it's making a substantial difference early on in terms of our net rating. We're going to go with what works. Where else do we apply that logic? Oh, right, the backup guard. When we're talking about Jaden Hardy minutes versus Spencer Dinwiddie. Jaden Hardy had his couple nice games there in a row. We saw him get an opportunity, and the first time it kind of was a little more ho-hum. What happened? We saw Spencer Dinwiddie come in. He had his nice moment or two. Now he's been kind of quiet for a couple games, so I'll be curious to see where that's going to go. It's just that kind of balancing act where it's like, look, unless you are that dude, and you could maybe say like, oh, well, why isn't Derek Lively considered or viewed as that dude? But it's like, when we talk about that, we're talking about your role in the offense. When we're having to run sets for you, and it's not just like, hey, we're going to utilize you in a pick and roll threat or whatever, a lob threat. When we're talking about that, it's a little bit different. You're always going to run your stuff for Luka. It doesn't matter what his shooting percentage on the game is. You're always going to run your stuff for Kyrie, and you're always going to try and find ways to get Klay involved. Anybody else is basically all right, let's see how they're doing right now. Maybe in a situational matchup, we'll go to them, but we're not going to just continually hammer away at it again and again unless it makes sense. That's the big thing here. So, as it goes to the center starting conversation, Gafford, I think he's earned it thus far. I think his improvements are very significant and worth noting. And I think Lively is still looking just like the dude we saw in the playoffs last year. It's not hitting quite the same ceiling of impact, but you see the flashes, you see the moment. I almost think of it as the difference of being just totally dialed in the zone as he was for an extended period. And now it's kind of like, all right, now we got to build again. But even his normal operating is still at a high level that just many guys can't match. So love the tandem. That's the main thing. Don't worry about it. Just be happy about how this team is, for a franchise that has been so starved for not even just good centers, just quality centers. For them to have 2 of these guys simultaneously, both of them 26 or younger, is insane. This is a feast after decades of famine. This is just good times if you want to look at center basketball play in Mavericks history. So I love it. I love what we got. I'm not worried about who starts, and neither are they, which is the big thing. So that's a thumbs up. Looking at this team overall, as I wrap this up here, one thing that I am most encouraged about, I don't see a lot of holes in this roster. And Zach Lowe even commented as much the other night against the Timberwolves. This team doesn't have a lot of holes with it. The fact that Quentin Grimes, he hit 3 threes in that game, but he really hadn't done anything of what we expected yet in this season. That was really the first flash of something. And Najee Marshall, from an offensive sense, really hadn't done anything yet either. Yeah, he had the game-sealing steal on Anthony Edwards, and that was huge. That was the first moment where I was like, all right, there's the pop. Other than that, it's been he's been solid defensively. But you hadn't seen what we expected. And that's one of those things being compared to Derrick Jones Jr. as a challenge. Derrick Jones Jr., his productivity and his stats might be similar to a lot of what you get in Marshall, but they are very different in terms of their play styles. Derrick Jones Jr. is lightning in a bottle. He's electric. He's exciting. He will make these huge plays that I do think the team feeds on. And I've said before, I think they will miss in a grand scheme of things. Doesn't mean you can't find that somewhere else, or with these other new parts, find a similar way to kind of recreate that on some level. But that is something they're going to have to adapt to not having. Marshall is a much steadier hand, and I think in a lot of respects, better, just not as flashy. So that's something to look at. But aside from the fact that neither of those two have given you yet what you expected from them, to be in this situation where you're at and to look at your roster and say, all right, what's just a flat-out weakness on this team? Well, it's definitely not the center. It's definitely not the point guard. They've got guys that can create a little bit. Obviously, Luka and Kai. I'm talking about outside of Luka and Kai. They got guys that can do a little bit to create. Marshall can do a little bit for himself off the dribble. PJ can do a little for himself, slash into the basket. You got, Exum, whenever he comes back, is just going to be another one of those guys you can introduce into the fold. You got Jaden Hardy, you got Spencer Dinwiddie. Like, you have plenty of ball handlers, plenty of guys that can create and have good vision. You have guys that can score and create their own basket or create for others. You have a two-headed monster at center that no other team in the league can match. There's just not a lot of weakness to this team. Like, there's things in certain matchups that might be able to be stressed more so. But if you're on your game in other areas that you're typically going to be on, you don't have to worry about it so much. Like, you can withstand those things most nights. You just have to see. So overall, this has been about the start I expected. Obviously you'd like to say like, 4-0, sure. But overall, I expected Luka to start slow, missing the entire preseason the way he did. I thought it's going to take him some time to get going. And it has. But eventually he's going to flip the switch, go back to his normal self, and we're going to see what this team can really look like. Klay has been everything I hoped he would be thus far. In fact, he's shown indications that he can be more than I thought he could be, which is phenomenal. Derek Lively and Gafford, again, both of them making significant steps forward. I'm very pleased by that, looking every bit as stout as it did before, with the exception of the Phoenix game, in which, that was mostly Nurkic feasting on Maxey, but even still, just looking at this team top to bottom, part of it is just like the rotation and how you have these pieces gelling together all at the same time and really maximizing it, where just everything is hitting. But the thing is, not everything is going to hit and be on point every single game. The idea is that you have several of those things falling into place and doing what they should, and the rest will take care of itself. You're not going to have a lot of nights where you just blow a team out like 150 to 120 or something like that, or 100, and everybody across the board, like Luka's got a triple-double, 30-point triple-double, Kai's got 26, Klay's got 21, Lively's got 14 and 14, Gafford's got 9 and 8 or something like that, Grimes has 4 threes, Jaden Hardy has 11 points. Like, you're not going to have a lot of games that look like that, where all of those things are happening simultaneously. The key is that you have the ability for it, guys who are capable of doing that, and you can stack that in a way to arrange the win you need for that night. You're building your case for an outcome you're hoping for. And most combinations you're going to come up with this roster constructed like it is, I think, are typically going to produce wins. So that Timberwolves game, as we talked about, the Mavericks got in at 2:30 in the morning after playing the night before against Utah, and then having to play at 6:30 that night. That's a quick turnaround in a difficult thing against a team that hates your guts and just wanted to bury you. The fact that you get in there and not just get a win, but get a win in the way that you do, where you just straight up little bro them, where they're trying to get up in your face and you're like, that's cute. We're going to put you back down on the mat, though. We're going to remind you who's in charge here. It's a statement not just to Minnesota, but to the league at large. Like, bro, we're getting no respect here. We are still that team that was just in the finals last year. We are the reigning Western Conference champions. It doesn't matter if you're looking at this and if you're enamored with J.J. Redick and the Lakers and all of that right now. And they're very impressive so far, for sure. Doesn't matter if you're looking at that, though. You can't keep putting disrespect on our name. Or I guess you can, but it's at your own cost. Like, we're going to make this statement as loud and clear as we can. We are still here. We are still every bit as good as we were last year. In fact, in many respects, we might end up being better than we were last year. Now, will that produce the same outcome necessarily? No, because there's too many other variables to consider. You have to look at how other teams are, what the health situation is, what matchups are at certain moments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I always say health permitting. But even still, you've issued your statement, and I think this was the first time people around the league might be looking and going like, oh, so Dallas is still for real. That wasn't just a flash in the pan last year, huh? All right, game on. It's all you can ask for at this point in the season. Whether you're 3-1 or 4-0, you're generally going to be looking at that and just saying like, do I have your attention now? Did you forget who I am? All right, well, you're not going to forget for much longer. You're going to remember today. But that does it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like the video, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the Dallas Prospect. And until next time, guys, remember, every legend was once a prospect. Peace!